Okay, so as I said in the intro to this segment, we're welcoming Raymond Ibrahim to the show. All right, we're going to be talking about the fact that in Canada, in 2023, you had 100 churches burned, four during Christmas of 2023. And I want to ask Ray. I would say, what the hell's going on? Why isn't there more awareness of this? Okay. Now, many of you out there know Raymond Ibrahim. He's an expert in Islamic history and doctrine, is the author of Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West. That was published in 2018. Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's New War on Christmas, which was published in 2013. And The Al-Qaeda Reader, which correct me if I'm wrong, Raymond, that came out in 2007. Ravens appeared all over the place: C-SPAN, Al Jazeera, CNN, NPR, PBS. He's been published by the New York Times Syndicate, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Financial Times, and the Weekly Standard. Raymond Ibrahim, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe, brother.
Thanks, Joe and Joe. Great to be with you guys again.
Absolutely. And like I said, I mean, this should be more than, this is a topic that should be discussed more than on just social media. Whether you're a big social media podcaster, whether you're, Joe and I are a little on the, smaller end, whatever the case might be. But, it's like the mainstream media. Well, let's get into it. I'm going to hand it over to Joe.
Raymond, clearly Justin Trudeau's no friend of Christian churches, never mind the Catholic Church. Talk about these churches that were torched, particularly around the Christmas season. Were there any investigations? Were there any people who were basically arrested? And was this linked to Islamic terror?
Sure. So, okay, let's start with the four that were torched right around the Christmas season. And I think the first one was maybe just a few days before Christmas Eve, and the last one was right around Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. So it was definitely the intention was to actually mar and burn Christmas Day. In other words, to make a statement about Christmas, obviously. I don't believe it was Muslims, actually. This is connected to what's been happening since 2001, right around June, which is, you may have heard they found mass graves in these residential schools of Canada, and these residential schools were basically run by Catholic churches. But what they were is they would take young natives of Canada, and try to raise them as Canadians, including by teaching them about Christianity. It was technically an altruistic and good thing, created to assimilate the natives into Canada, which was then, of course, a Christian nation. But now the narrative, without any evidence, is that all these young natives were taken, sadistically tortured, killed, and the church buried them and hushed it up. And now it's all coming to revelation. And if you look into it, as I did in these articles, and you speak to experts who know all about this, that's all bunk. That's not they died from typhoid, they died from diseases, they died from all sorts of things. They weren't killed. It was just, the 1800s. That's the sort of thing that happened. But as usual, that's all that the left, as we call it, needed to run with and to just attack, hate, destroy Christianity in Canada with full impunity and with cover from the leftist leaders such as Justin Trudeau. So when this happened in the summer of 2001, as I was saying, he came out and okay, the 100 churches that you mentioned in the beginning, this is from the summer of 2001 up until now. And in the initial summer, the attack, something like 20 or 25 churches were torched. And this is when it kind of made a little news, and Justin Trudeau, he condemned it, but then he said it's understandable. And, when you say something is unacceptable, but it's also understandable, you just canceled it out and basically said nothing. All right. And he was the one but other Canadian leaders, such as her name is Walea Harsh, or I'm forgetting her name, maybe I'm not pronouncing it right, but she's Indian, Muslim, I think of Punjabi ancestry, and she was the head of some major Canadian civil rights organization. She tweeted, "Burn it all down," after 20 or 25 churches were burned. And that was the prevalent sentiment, I would say, amongst Canada's elite. So since then, what you've had is more churches. Okay, 96 were burned in the year of 2023, 4 right before Christmas, as mentioned, and it's probably leftist elements who are doing it. But just to prove the point that this is just a pretext, a Coptic church, a Canadian Coptic church, Coptic being Egyptian Christianity, was also burned. Why were they burned? The Copts just started coming into Canada in the last decade or two or three, well after these purported mass graves were created. Okay, and they have nothing to do with it as the people. They're escaping persecution from Egypt, and their church was burned down. And non-Catholic churches were burned down. If you're going with the idea that it's Catholics who did this, well, why are you attacking? So it's a hatred for Christianity in general manifesting itself. It found a pretext, and it's just going with it. And the media, as you can see, this isn't even a story. Who's talking about this? Imagine if 100 mosques in 1 year were attacked and burned in some country, Western country, or if just one, how this would be news all over. But very few people even know this is happening. And that's because the media in Canada, in the West in general, and the Canadian leadership are dissembling. So in regards to one of the several of the burned churches around Christmas, the authorities, you were asking me how's their response. So the response seems to be legitimate, but they are also trying to distance what I'm saying. So they actually said, well, we don't know. We're sure this has nothing to do with anti-Christian sentiment. And it's just as if all these attacks that are happening now, since the 2001 initial attack, are aberrations and have no continuity or connection with what's happening, when obviously they do. So they're also trying to underplay the animus and the motivation behind these ongoing attacks on these churches.
Raymond Ibrahim, let me ask you a question. I'm a Christian. I have hope. Okay. It's a theological virtue. So I want to be clear when I make this statement, okay? When it comes to the political level, the societal level, I don't have any hope. And the reason why, and I want your comments on this, okay, is that because the media is so monolithic that Justin Trudeau made up things to say and smear Canadian truckers driving across the country in protest, had to make things up. Okay, like there's Nazi flags or swastikas and things like that. They have to make things up about the Catholic Church in the example that you gave. Okay, when it comes to this hoax of these mass graves, they have to make it up. But when the violence is on the left or coming from the left and perpetrated, okay, they, like you said, they say, well, it's understandable, and the media picks that up and they keep parroting that. And in that regard, I say on that political level, nothing, I feel hopeless. Nothing is going to change because the media is controlled. And okay, there are, like I said, larger personalities on social media. Perhaps they could talk about these things, get the message out. But the fact is that, sadly, most people still get their news from corporate media. It's just the way it is, okay? And that means they could keep peddling their narrative. Where am I wrong, Ray? Help me out, brother.
Oh, you're not wrong. I completely agree with you when it comes to the so-called mainstream media. They're in it for, there's a narrative, okay? They have a story, and anything that can help buttress and strengthen that story, they're going to take it and run with it and exploit it, such as this mass grave historical thing, which is nothing shocking or surprising, but of course they're blowing it out of proportion. And anything that goes against, what they're trying to prove is going to get sidelined, suppressed, and including, of course, with straight up lying and fabrication and making things up. So that is definitely the mainstream narrative. I think the only hope is the people are starting to get it, okay, a little bit, but that doesn't mean they're going to do something specifically about it. And this is, I think, more evidence in Europe, where the similar phenomenon is going on in a different context, where you have Muslim migrants overwhelming the continent, especially Western Europe, and the media and the politicians are still doing the same thing. So if you recall, in Dublin, for example, in Ireland, some Muslim migrant just randomly went and stabbed 3 5-year-old children. I think he almost killed one, hit her near the heart, and also their caretaker. And because the Irish people had enough of that, because that's very common all throughout Europe, wherever you have Muslim migrants, just random violence, okay, they actually protested very violently in Dublin against the authorities, and basically against the idea of mass migration, because they've had enough of what's happening to their nations. And how did the authorities respond? Of course, they responded with gaslighting measures. So basically, the Prime Minister of Ireland, who's not even Irish, I believe he's a Hindu, came on and started pontificating about multiculturalism and how we need it and it's important for Ireland, et cetera, et cetera. And then he said the people who are protesting are haters and they live to hate. And he essentially was calling them racist, playing the racist card because they're angry because a Muslim migrant was attacking or almost killed children. And this, again, this is the tip of the iceberg. The same week that happened in France, less known, in a rural town, there was a small party amongst the villagers, and something like 20, 30 Muslim migrants came with swords and started attacking people and killed at least, I think, one young man. And again, the French in that town rose in violence, and the French authorities responded by banning them, just like the Irish. Now there's new laws censoring freedom of speech, so you can't now even speak up against the narrative. So the narrative is saying, no, migrants are wonderful. It's your fault. You're a racist. Don't believe your lying eyes with what's happening. And you still continue. Now we're going to shut you down, and now it's illegal. Or they're creating actual new laws, and that's what the French also said in regards to the French people rising up against that particular incident. So, the only good thing, I suppose, if you want to put it that way, with this constant lying from the media is that more and more people are becoming distrustful of the media, are looking to different sources, and are becoming, in this case, very rebellious. It's gotten to the point with me, for example, if the media says something, then it's got to be the opposite, and that's without even me knowing what's going on. In other words, you have to really go and do your own research whenever they say something, especially if it fits their narrative, because that's all they want to do. That's all they exist for.
Well, and that's the appropriate reaction. Is anything they say, I don't have to do research. I'm 56 years old. Okay. I've been seeing this my whole life, going back to when, I first became politically aware sometime in my teen years. I know what the media does. Okay. So they lie. They lie about everything. Just to bring them up, they lied about Donald Trump colluding with Russia. They lie until they get busted. And then they all come together and they defend their I think, criminality. Joe Rossinello.
You mentioned the migrants in Europe. You also mentioned this narrative going on in Canada, but ultimately it's about feeding the political base. I mean, they know that the migrants, you mentioned France, you mentioned Ireland, they're going to vote for these particular parties that are going to support them. Basically, it's a bribe. You're paying people, you give them a pittance to basically vote for you. We're doing that here with our southern border. And then you have in Canada, basically Justin Trudeau is no friend of Christian churches or a voting bloc. So clearly this is the narrative that wants to basically get put forth to help him stay in power. And what you both are saying is people can't see through it. You could look some people straight in the face and they'll buy it all, hook, line, and sinker. And that's the danger, to be truthful with you. I'd like your comment on that because, ultimately the press is there to put the government in check. That's why you have a free press. But what we're seeing in the West, Europe, America, and Canada, it's a press that's almost a propaganda machine for the power base. And Donald Trump put it rightly. It is the enemy of the American people. There is no question about that. The quote unquote free press is the enemy of the people. What's your thoughts, Raymond?
Oh, I would largely agree with exactly with what you're saying because, and what is the press and what is the media? Well, it is made up of different people and organizations, and you look and you dig into them, and what are they? Well, they're working for the powers that be. They're just another angle, another face of the machinery, the propaganda mouthpiece, essentially, which covers for them, which maintains and creates and defends the narrative, the message, as they call it. It's very obvious for anyone, but like you also said, it's unfortunate because there's people who just can't get that. It's hey, the man in the suit and the tie on the TV told me so it must be true, as if there's some kind of checks and balances and someone's monitoring what's being said and making sure it's objective and true. Like that organization, I think it's called Snopes, which has taken on the mantle of being the ones to decide what's true and what's false. And anytime something negative comes out about the left, most recently, I think it was Joe Biden wearing a construction hat backwards. And so what they do is they verify, is that true? And they even concluded with that. No, it's not. That's false. And then they went back and said, no, it is actually true. When it was so obvious that they couldn't lie or twist it around. So it's the problem is you still have too many people who are so accustomed to believing what they're told in the media. They can't believe it's that bad. That it's so bad that these guys have no checks and balances, are saying whatever they want, are just making things up and lying. And they're the ones, I think that's why the media even still exists. They're preying on that particular segment of the population, which happily I think is shrinking as time goes by.
Raymond Ibrahim is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Raymond's an expert in Islamic history and doctrine. He's author of Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West. Ray, let me ask you this, okay? Maybe it sounds a little bit naive, but I'm going to throw it out there. My reading of the history, the tension between Islam and the West, which back in the day we know was tension between Islam and the Catholic Church, Catholic Europe, okay? The Catholic Europe was extremely patient when it came to the spread of Islam. Islam took over 2/3 of Christendom. The church didn't do anything. I mean, they tried to come into France. Let's be clear. Okay, I did believe it was 732 AD. Charles Martel beat them back into Spain. They tried several times after that. Now, these European leaders, I guess they just said at one point, well, we're actually not going to fight you. Just come on in. And because what or are they delusional to think that there's actually something to gain about allowing these waves and waves of Muslim immigration into Europe? I know Joe said it's about power. Okay, I could buy that. Okay, what do they do when they themselves get overwhelmed by these large swaths of Muslim populations, let's say in France or Germany or Italy or Ireland or England? Okay, what do these people think, these European leaders think, that once they gain all this power, what do they think? These Muslims aren't going to turn on them? I mean, I know that was a little bit of a ramble, but I think you know where I'm going with that, Raymond.
Yeah. I think in their minds, and this to some extent is true, they're not part of the general population, so it really won't affect them. The elites of Europe who are behind these decisions don't live in areas that will ever have a migrant running around. That's for the plebeians, the hoi polloi, the masses who are protesting because they actually get to live with the migrants and see what happens and how their society is transforming for the worse. So I think for these elites, these people who have their bunkers on islands, and this is not something they're going to do. To them, humans are just a bunch of sheep, and they're putting them together, and have their experiments and whatever it's working for them, whatever agenda they have. But they're not going to be mingling with the general population, whether it's Muslims or Europeans or whoever it is. So I think that's partially or part of their logic as to why they're doing this. And I think the other thing, though, is these elites, they just have such a viral hatred for Christianity. And it's this idea that because Islam is the historic enemy of Christianity, and wherever it goes, Christianity disappears or quickly dwindles and churches get destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that how different Muslims and leftist liberals are, yet they sure share the same animus for churches, don't they? Because the Islamic world is the real place where churches habitually get attacked, and now it's in Canada even more so. So I think part of the reason also in bringing in this large Muslim demographic to Western nations is to sort of suppress, destroy, push down Christianity, and water it down. That's what multiculturalism, diversity really does, right? You bring different religions and different things. So I think in their mind, it's not so much that they're stupid; it's that they just think they're immune to this, and it serves the greater good, which is the complete, destruction really of Christian society and civilization. And it's not really going to affect them because it's one group of masses that they're going to control, whether they're Europeans or Muslims. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Joe Ressinello, we have time for one more question for Raymond.
Recently, Raymond, 3 American soldiers were killed by a drone from Iran. Where do you think this is going to go? This could get ugly. This happened, I think, recently. There was a drone strike in a base in the Middle East. 3 American soldiers were killed. They believe the drone attack came from Iran. I saw it yesterday in the news.
Yeah.
Where do you think it's going to go? Do you think it's going to expand the fighting between the United States and Iran?
I think that's what a lot some elements would like to see. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I don't know if that's kind of like another adventure into Iraq. that sort of thing. But it is very relatively new. So to be honest with you, I can't comment a whole lot because I was traveling. I just heard a little bit about it like you just did without
Yeah,
really
I was
delving
flipping
into
through
it.
last
I don't
night
know
and
the
I saw
details.
it, and
Yeah,
people are saying that there's going to be retaliation on the part of the U.S. It's just another basic
yeah,
leg to the conflict going on with Israel and Hamas, and obviously Iran has a hand in that, and it could just get bigger, and it frankly it's going to destabilize the world just that much more. I was just wondering if to
yeah,
be
yeah.
honest, I'd like to maybe in another segment bring you on to
Right.
kind of break down what's going on in that particular part of the world, because there's so many voices out there, and frankly I think it can get out of control quickly, and I think this is just another example of another like arm just kind of going out,
Yeah.
another act of violence which could pull us
Right.
into another conflict, frankly an endless war which we just don't
Yeah.
need.
The Middle East is a complete. I just also heard and don't know the details yet about a church in Turkey being attacked or bombed and people being killed, and ISIS, the Islamic State, is now claiming that. So, yeah, that area is really kind of spiraling into a new phase of madness, I think.
Yeah, Raymond, real quick, where can our audience members catch up on all the things that you have going on? Whether seeing you, your writing, where could they go?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. My website's the best one-stop place to go, RaymondIbrahim.com, RaymondIbrahim, M as in man.com. And it has links to all my books as well, the most recent Defenders of the West, the Christian heroes who stood against Islam, which I mention right now because it represents the antithesis of the leadership that we have today. Those were the guys who fought tooth and nail and died to keep Islam out of Europe. Whereas today, the leadership is doing everything to suppress its own citizenry from resisting it and bringing it and overwhelming the continent with it. So it's a total topsy turvy situation.
Well, and it is topsy turvy, and like Joe said, there's a lot of fog and there's a lack of clarity sometimes. That's why we're happy you came on the show to provide a voice of clarity. I think people just really, first of all, they need to go to your website, and because I get your emails. So in as much as I could, keep up on a lot of this stuff, you're one of the valuable sources that we have to provide that clarity. And that's what we need. If we don't know what we're fighting against, you might as well stick your head in the sand. Raymond Ibrahim, thanks for coming on the show, brother. We always appreciate it. We know we'll talk to you soon, man.
Same here. Thanks a lot, Joe and Joe.
You got it.